Hello students, this is Module 5 RTOS and IDE for Embedded System Design, Lecture 2. Topics that I am going to cover are task, process and threads. So in detail we'll learn about process and threads. So next topic is task scheduling. In that we have non-preemptive scheduling and preemptive scheduling. Now we'll take up the first topic, task, process and threads. So next we'll know about the task. So the term task means something that needs to be done. In our day-to-day life, we are bound to the execution of a number of tasks. The task can be the one assigned by our managers or the one assigned by our professors or teachers or the one related to our personal or family needs. In addition, we'll have an order of priority and schedule or timeline for executing these tasks. In operating system context, a task is defined as a program in execution and related information maintained by operating system for the program. Task is also known as nothing but job in operating system context. A program or part of it in execution is also called as process. The term task, job and process refer to the same entity in operating system context, and most often they are used interchangeably. Next is process. A process is a program or a part of it in execution. Process is also known as an instance of a program in execution. Multiple instances of the same program can execute simultaneously. A process requires various system resources like CPU for executing the process, memory for storing the code corresponding to the process and associated variables, input-output devices for information exchange, so etc. A process is a sequence in execution. Next is the structure of a process. The concept of process that leads to concurrent execution of the task. Concurrent means the operation which takes place at the same time and thereby the efficient utilization of the CPU and other system resources. Concurrent execution is achieved through the sharing of the CPU among the processes. A process imitates a processor in its property and it holds a set of registers, and also it has some process status, a program counter to point to the next execution instruction of the process, and it has a stack for holding the local variables associated with the process and the code corresponding to the process. So this we can visualize using the figure which is shown in the next slide. So this figure shows the structure of a process. In this process, we can observe there is a stack pointer, working registers, status registers and program counter. So this program counter always points to the next executable instruction of the process. So this process is in code memory. A process which inherits all the properties of the CPU can be considered as a virtual processor. Awaiting its turn to have its properties switched into physical processor. When the processor gets its turn, its registers and program counter register becomes mapped to the physical registers of the CPU. From a memory perspective, the memory occupied by the process is segregated into three regions, namely stack memory, data memory, and code memory. Stack memory holds all temporary data such as variables local to the process. Data memory holds all global data for the process. The code memory contains the program code, that is instructions corresponding to the process. On loading a process into the main memory, a specific area of memory is allocated for the process. The stack memory usually starts at the highest memory address from the memory area allocated for the process. For example, the memory map of the memory area allocated for the process is 2048 to 2100, that is 2048 to 2100. The stack memory starts address 2100 and grows downwards to accommodate the variables local to the process. Process states and state transition. The creation of a process to its termination, that means starting to ending of a process, is not a single step operation. The process traverses through a series of states during its transition from the newly created state to the terminated state. The cycle through which a process changes its state from newly created to execution completed is known as a process life cycle. The various states through which a process traverses through during a process life cycle indicates the current state of the process with respect to time and also provides information on what it is allowed to do next. Figure which is shown in the next slide represents various states associated with a process. This diagram shows the process states and state transition representation. The state at which the process is being created is referred as created state. The operating system recognizes a process in the created state, but no resources are allocated to the process. The state where the process is incepted into the memory and waiting the processor time for execution, that is known as ready state. At this ready state, the process is placed in the ready list queue maintained by the OS. The state where the source code instructions corresponding to the process is being executed is called running state. In this state, the state at which the process execution will happen. Blocked state or wait state refers to a state where a running process is temporarily suspended from execution and does not have any immediate access to any resources. This blocked state might be invoked by various conditions. Something like the process enters a wait state for an event to occur. For example, waiting for user inputs such as keyboard input. Or other condition might be like waiting for getting access to a shared resource. A state where process completes its execution is known as completed state. The transition of a process from one state to another is known as state transition. When a process changes its state from ready to running or from running to blocked or terminated or from blocked to running, the CPU allocation for the process may also change. So next is process management. Process management deals with the creation of a process, setting up the memory space for the process, loading the process code into the memory space, allocating system resources, setting up a process control block or the process and process termination or deletion. Next is threads. A thread is a primitive that can execute code. That means it is an early stage which executes a code. A thread is a single sequential flow of control within a process. Thread is also known as lightweight process. A process can have many threads of execution. Different threads which are part of a process share the same address space. That means they share the same data memory, code memory and heap memory area. Threads maintain their own thread status, program counter and stack. The memory model for a process and its associated threads are given in the figure which is shown in the next slide. So this figure shows the memory organization of a process and its associated threads. Here we can observe a process which is having a separate data memory and a code memory and a stack memory. But the stack memory is shared between two different threads, thread 1 and thread 2. The concept of multi-threading. A process or task in an embedded applications may be complex or it might be lengthy one. and it may contain various sub-operations like getting input from I/O devices connected to the processor, performing some internal calculations or some operations, updating some I/O devices, etc. If all these subfunctions of a task are executed in sequence, the CPU utilization may not be efficient one. For example, if the process is waiting for a user input, the CPU enters the wait state for an event, and the process execution also enters a wait state. What I gave you an example in the previous slide, there was a single sequential execution of the whole process. If the task or a process can be split into different threads which carry out different functions of the process, then CPU can be effectively utilized. So when thread corresponding to the I/O operation, when it enters to the wait state, the another thread which do not require this I/O event, so that can perform operation and can be switched into execution. This leads to more speedy execution of the process and the efficient utilization of the processor time and resources. The multi-threaded architecture of a process can be better visualized with a thread process diagram, which is shown in the next slide. This diagram shows the process with multi-threads. If the process is split into multi-threads, which executes a portion of the process, there will be a main thread and rest of the threads will be created within the main thread. So this we can observe in the diagram. Use of multi-threads to execute a process brings the following advantages. Better memory utilization. So in multiple threads of the same process which shares the address space for data memory. By doing this, this reduces the complexity of inter-thread communication since variables can be shared across the threads. Since the process is split into different threads, when one thread enters a wait state, a CPU can be utilized by other threads of the process that do not require the event which the other thread is waiting for processing. By doing this, speeds up the execution of the process. Efficient utilization of the CPU. The CPU is engaged all the time. Thread standards. Thread standards deal with different standards available for thread creation and management. These standards are utilized by the operating systems for thread creation and thread management. It is a set of thread class libraries. The commonly available thread class libraries are POSIX threads, Win32 threads, Java threads. POSIX threads. POSIX stands for Portable Operating System Interface. The POSIX.4 standard deals with the real-time extensions, and POSIX.4a standard deals with thread extensions. The POSIX standard library for thread creation and management is pthreads. pthreads library defines the set of POSIX thread creation and management functions in C language. Here, this primitive is used for creating a new thread for running the function start function. So here we are running a function start function. So this start function is the function the thread is going to execute, and arguments is the arguments for start functions. So we can see at the end we have void arguments. So that arguments is used for the arguments for start function. And what we have used here, pthread_t, is to handle a newly created thread, whatever the thread we create. So in order to handle that, we use this pthread_t, and pthread_attr_t is the data type for holding the thread attributes. So whatever the attributes we have in that thread, so in order to hold that, we use this data type. So in this primitive, it blocks the current thread and it waits until the completion of the thread which is pointed by it. Here a new thread is what in this example is pointed. So whatever the current thread it is executing, it blocks that and it goes to a new thread, which is, or it might be any other thread which is pointed. So all the POSIX thread calls returns an integer. So a return value of 0, it indicates that the success of the call. So here is an example for POSIX threads. So write a multi-threaded application to print hello I am in main thread from the main thread and hello I am in new thread. So that you have to print it 5 times each using the pthread create function and pthread underscore join function using POSIX primitives. So here what is shown, the program is a thread within a thread, that is this is a main thread within a thread. So we are displaying hello I am in a new thread in this program. So let me explain this. Here we need to include header files pthread, std library and stdio header files. So after that the main program starts, which is explained in the next slide. So here this is a subprogram. Let me explain this. Void new underscore thread, which is a function we are calling. Then a void, we are not passing any arguments here. We are using 2 integers I and j, and we are it goes to for loop. Here j is equal to 0, j is less than 5. As j is 0, it is less than 5, it increments and it prints hello I am in a new thread. So again we need to go for a for loop. So here I is 0 and I it increments, and this will be within the loop until I becomes 10,000. So this is just loop is used for creating a delay, and we go for return null. So as I told you in the previous slide, returning the value 0, it indicates that success of the call. So here we are calling a function. So this function has been successfully completed. So and again it goes to the main program. Here is a main program. Main program starts with int main void. Here we have used 2 integers I and j, and we are using a function pthread underscore t, and tcb is an arguments, that is a thread control block, and we are using a if statement here for creating a new thread, that is what a main thread here. If we are creating a thread, therefore I'm using pthread underscore create, and I am loading the address of the thread control block tcb, and we are passing nothing there, that is null, and I'm creating another thread within this main thread, that is new underscore thread, and again we are passing 0, null. So here if the execution or if the main thread is created, that is the return value is other than integer, then the execution fails, that means the thread is not created, then we are printing that error in creating new thread, then we return -1. So if the thread has been created, means then we go for the for loop, j is equal to 0 less than 5 j plus plus, then we print hello I am in main thread. So then that hello I am in main thread has to be printed, and it should remain on the screen for some time period, therefore we are using a delay for loop there, and again I'm using if statement pthread join, that is we are joining if any other threads are there, so we are going to join that, and we are passing null in TCB. Then if that joining of the threads has been failed means we print that error in the thread join, we have error in thread join, so then we return -1. So main program returns 1 saying that it says that we are passing an integer value. So always POSIX, I told you, thread calls always returns an integer value. The termination of the thread can happen in different ways. The thread can terminate either by completing its execution, that is natural termination, or by a forced termination. In natural termination, the thread completes its execution and returns back to the main thread through a simple return or by executing the pthread_exit function call. Forced termination can be achieved by the call pthread_cancel function or through the termination of the main thread with exit or exec functions. Pthread_cancel function call is used by a thread to terminate another thread. Thread preemption. Thread preemption is the act of preempting the currently running thread. It means stopping the currently running thread temporarily. Thread preemption is performed for sharing the CPU time among all the threads. The execution switching among the threads is known as thread context switching. Thread context switching is dependent on the operating system scheduler and the type of the thread. When we say thread, it falls into any one of the following types: user level thread, kernel system level thread, many to one model, one to one model, many to many model. So here we'll discuss first type, user level threads. So user level threads do not have a kernel or any operating system supported, and they exit solely in the running process. That means they exit alone in the running process. Even if a process contains multiple user level threads, the OS treats it as a single thread and will not switch the execution among different threads of it. It is the responsibility of the process to schedule each thread as and when it is required. In summary, user level threads of a process are non-preemptive at thread level from OS perspective. The execution switching happens only when the currently executing user level thread is voluntarily blocked. Here, no OS intervention and system calls are involved in the context switching of user level threads. This makes context switching of the user level threads very fast. Kernel or system level threads. Kernel level threads are individual units of execution which the OS treats as separate threads. The OS interrupts the execution of the currently running kernel thread and switches the execution to another kernel thread based on the scheduling policies implemented by the OS. So overall, kernel level threads are preemptive. Kernel level threads involve lots of kernel overhead and involve system calls for context switching. However, these kernel threads maintain a clear layer of abstraction and allow threads to use system calls independently. There are many ways for binding user level threads with system or kernel level threads. Many to one model. Here, many user level threads are mapped to a single kernel thread. In this model, the kernel treats all user level threads as a single thread, and the execution switching among the user level threads happens when a currently executing user level thread voluntarily blocks itself the CPU. Solaris Green Thread and GNU Portable Threads are examples for this. The pthread example is an illustrative example for application with many to one thread model. One-to-one model. Here, each user level thread is bonded to the kernel or system level thread. In many-to-many model, many user level threads are allowed to be mapped to many kernel threads. Examples for one-to-one model is Windows XP, Windows NT, 2000 and Linux threads are example for one-to-one thread models. And modified pthread example is an illustrative example for application with one-to-one thread model. For many-to-many model, Windows NT and Windows 2000 with thread fiber package is an example for this. Now let us summarize the properties of process and threads. Thread is a single unit of execution and is part of process. Process is a program in execution and contains one or more threads. A thread does not have its own data memory and heap memory, where heap memory is nothing but a location in memory where memory may be allocated at random access, unlike the stack where memory is allocated and released in a very defined order. Heap memory is used for dynamic memory allocation stored in the computer's RAM. So in thread, it shares the data memory and heap memory with other threads of the same process, while in process has its own code memory, data memory and stack memory. A thread cannot live independently, it lives within the process, while process contains at least one thread. There can be multiple threads in a process. The first thread, or we call it as a main thread, calls the main function and occupies the start of the stack memory of the process. While threads within a process shares the code, data and heap memory. Each thread holds a separate memory area for stack. Threads are very inexpensive to create. Processes are very expensive to create, which involves many OS overhead. Context switching is inexpensive and fast in thread, while context switching is complex and involves lot of OS overhead and is comparatively slower in process. If a thread expires, its stack is reclaimed by the process. If a process dies, the resources allocated to it are reclaimed by the OS and all associated threads of the process also die. So next we'll discuss about task scheduling. So next we'll know about task scheduling. So scheduling means, we know the word, what is the meaning of scheduling. Scheduling means at what time what we have to do is nothing but scheduling. So for example, if you on the morning will schedule what we have to do for the whole day usually. So at what time we have to go for the college, and at what time we have to go for the market to buy something, or at what time I have to sit and study. So all these things we schedule in the morning. It's not actually the timetable. So timetable is different, scheduling is different. Scheduling is nothing but at what time in this time period what I have to do. That is what scheduling is. So multitasking involves the execution switching among different tasks. So we'll have different tasks, so we keep on switching these different tasks. So there should be some mechanism in place to share the CPU among different tasks. So we come across, we want to use the CPU at a time, different tasks may want to use the CPU. So we need to schedule that what task has to, at how much time that task has to use the CPU. So that is what we have to schedule, and we have to decide these tasks when to exit and execute, and at what time it has to execute. So that is what meaning of scheduling is. Determining which task is to be executed at a given point of time is known as scheduling. So scheduling policies forms the guideline for determining which task is to be executed and when. So for this, scheduling policies are implemented using an algorithm, and it is run by the kernel as a service. So scheduling policies are implemented by algorithm, and it is run by the kernel, and that algorithm which is run by the kernel, we call it as service. So this kernel service which implements the scheduling algorithm, which we call it as scheduler. Based on the scheduling algorithm what we use, scheduling can be classified into two types: non-preemptive scheduling and preemptive scheduling. So non-preemptive means currently one task will be executing. It keeps on executing that task until it terminates, or else it may enter a wait state. Until then, that task will be keep on executing. So next, another type is preemptive scheduling. In preemptive is currently one task will be executing, so it will be preempted when and another task which is in a queue will be selected to execute. So temporarily the currently executing task will be stopped, and it gives a chance for the another task or a process to execute. That is called as preemptive scheduling. The process scheduling decision may takes place when a process switches its state to from running state to ready state. So already it will be in a running state, it switches to what? Ready state. So next one, it is in a running state, so it switches to block or wait state. So block or wait state from running state. Third one, it will be in block or wait state, so it will switch to ready state. Fourth one, completed state. So we'll take the first scenario. So in the first scenario, the process switches from running state to ready state. So that means the process switches to ready state from running state when it is preempted. So then only it can go to ready state from running state. So this scheduling is nothing but a preemptive type. So if you see in the scenario 3, so there from the block or wait state, the process will switch to ready state. This is depending on the priority basis. So when a process is executing on a priority basis, so that process, if it goes to wait state or block state, so then after completion of that state, so its IO will be switched to the ready state. The scheduler picks it for execution if the scheduling policy used is priority based preemptive. So here this scenario is execution takes place according to the priority basis. So whether it might be in preemptive or non-preemptive multitasking, the process will give up its CPU when it enters the block state or wait state, or when the process is completed, and it switches off the CPU at this stage. Coming to in scenario 2, the scheduling can be either preemptive or non-preemptive. While if you check in the scenario 4, there it can be a primitive, non-primitive, or it might be a cooperative type of scheduling. The selection of a scheduling algorithm should consider the following factors. So first one is CPU utilization. The scheduling algorithm should always make the CPU utilization to the maximum. CPU utilization is a direct measure of how much percentage of the CPU is being utilized. So next, second one is throughput. So this gives you an indication of number of processes executed per unit of time. The throughput for a good scheduler should always be higher. So third one is turnaround time, TAT. It is the amount of time taken by a process for completing its execution. It includes the time spent by the process for waiting for the main memory, time spent in the ready queue, time spent on completing the IO operations, and the time spent in execution. The turnaround time should be always minimum for a good scheduling algorithm. So next factor we have to consider is waiting time. So it is the amount of time spent by the process in the ready queue waiting to get the CPU time for execution. So if any process is already ready and it is in the queue and it is waiting for the CPU, is nothing but a waiting time. So always the waiting time should be minimum for a good scheduling algorithm. So next factor is response time. It is the time elapsed between the submission of a process and the first response. So for a good scheduling algorithm, the response time obviously it should be least as possible. So if you summarize all the factors, a good scheduling algorithm has high CPU utilization, it should have minimum turnaround time, it should have maximum throughput, and it should have least response time. So next factor we have to consider is waiting time. So it is the amount of time spent by the process in the ready queue waiting to get the CPU time for execution. So if any process is already ready and it is in the queue and it is waiting for the CPU, is nothing but a waiting time. So always the waiting time should be minimum for a good scheduling algorithm. So next factor is response time. It is the time elapsed between the submission of a process and the first response. So for a good scheduling algorithm, the response time obviously it should be least as possible. So if you summarize all the factors, a good scheduling algorithm has high CPU utilization, it should have minimum turnaround time, it should have maximum throughput, and it should have least response time. Preemptive scheduling. Preemptive is nothing but the act of temporarily interrupting a task which is being carried out. So in preemptive scheduling, the scheduler can preempt whatever the currently executing task or any process, and it selects another task from the ready queue for execution. So every task which is there in the ready queue will get a chance to execute. Whenever you preempt any task, and which task is to be picked up from the queue for execution after preempting, so is purely dependent on scheduling algorithm. A task which preempted by the scheduler is always moved to the ready queue. The act of moving a running process or any task into the ready queue by the scheduler without the process without requesting for it is known as preemption. So preemption is nothing but a task will be running. So that running task will be moved to the ready queue by the scheduler. So without the process requesting for it, so that without interrupting it, it will be moved to the ready queue. So that is known as preemption. Preemptive scheduling techniques. Preemptive scheduling can be implemented in different approaches, like time-based preemption or priority-based preemption. The various types of preemptive scheduling adopted in task or any process scheduling are preemptive shortest job first SJF, or else we call it as shortest remaining time SRT scheduling. Then second one is round robin RR scheduling, and third one is priority based scheduling. Preemptive shortest job first SJF, or else shortest remaining time SRT scheduling. So as the name itself says that, so whatever the process which is having a shortest time duration will be executed first. That is what a meaning of this. So in SJF, the process with the shortest estimated run time is scheduled first, so followed by the next shortest process, and so on. So in the queue, so it executes always, so which process having a lesser time duration for execution, so that process will be taken first and it will be executed. The preemptive SJF scheduling algorithm it will sort in the ready queue. So when a new process enters, so already assume that there is a queue and a new process has been entered the queue. So then it always compares the process which is there in the queue with the newly added process into the queue. With it compares with the time. So if newly added queue process will have a shortest time, so it gives priority to the newly added process than the other rest of the processes which are there in the queue. So the SJF algorithm, it sorts the ready queue. When a new process enters the ready queue, it checks whether the execution time of a new process is shorter than the remaining of the total estimated time for the currently executing process. If the execution time of the new process is lesser, then it currently executing process will be preempted and it gives a chance for the new process for execution. Thus, preemptive SJF scheduling always it compares with the execution completion time of a new process entered the ready queue with the remaining time of the completion of the currently executing process, and it schedules the process with shortest remaining time for execution. Preemptive SJF scheduling is also known as shortest remaining time SRT scheduling. So here you'll understand more clearly if I take an example. So this example says that there are three processes with IDs as P1, P2 and P3. Their estimated completion time is 10, 5 and 7 milliseconds and they enter the ready queue together. A new process with ID of P4 with estimated completion time 2 milliseconds enter the ready queue after 2 milliseconds. Assume that all the processes contains only CPU operation and there is no IO operations are involved. So here we need to calculate waiting time and turnaround time TAT for each process and average waiting time and turnaround time in the SRT scheduling. So here in this example which we have taken in a previous slide, so that is shown in this figure. You'll understand more clearly. So as the example says that initially there will be three process IDs with P1, P2 and P3 and their execution time period is P1 has 10 milliseconds, P2 has 5 milliseconds and P3 has 7 milliseconds. So initially the execution not yet started. So all these three processes will be in a queue. So according to SJF scheduling, so the one process which is having less time execution will be executed first or it will be scheduled first. So here according to this, P2 first it executes, then it gives a priority to P3, then it gives priority to P1. So now in the problem or example they have given that, so while executing has been started, after 2 milliseconds one more a new process will be added to the queue, ready queue, that is P4 with 2 milliseconds. So in the next step we can see that P2 has been executed for 2 milliseconds. Now the remaining time for P2 execution is 3 milliseconds. So at that time P4 is added with a less execution time. So compared to P2, P4 has less execution time, that is 2 milliseconds. Now P2 has to be preempted. It should be stopped now and P4 to be given chance for execution. Now P4 will be scheduled and it starts its execution. So once P4, in the next step we can see that P4 has been completed its working. So now from P1, P2 and P3, so again P2 has a less execution time. The chance will be given for, or the scheduling will be done for P2 first. So now P2 starts its execution. So after completion of the P2 execution, so left out is P1 and P3 in the next step. So among P1 and P3, so P3 has less execution time, so which is 7 milliseconds. So that will be scheduled now. So now P3 will be completed, and later at the last stage P1 will be completed, or P1 will be scheduled and it completes its execution. So this is how SJF will work. So next we have to calculate the timing, so that will show you in the next slide. The execution sequence can be written as below. So in this diagram we can see that initially P2 will be executing for 2 milliseconds, then P4 will be added to the queue, therefore which is having a lesser execution time period, that is 2 milliseconds. So P2 will be preempted, and scheduling will be done for P4. So P4 executes. After completion of P4, so again P2 will starts scheduling. So here after P2 completes its execution for 3 milliseconds, then the scheduling will be done for P3 and P4 respectively. So in order to calculate the waiting time for all the process, so waiting time for P2 is 0 milliseconds plus 4 minus 2 milliseconds, that is equal to 2 milliseconds. P2 starts executing first and is interrupted by P4 and has to wait till the completion of P4 to get the next CPU slot. So waiting time for P4 is 0 milliseconds because P4 starts executing by preempting P2. Since execution time for completion of P4 is 2 milliseconds, which is lesser than that of the remaining time of the execution completion of P2. Here P2 it is 3 milliseconds. So waiting time for P3 is 7 milliseconds. So P3 starts executing after completion of P4 as well as P2. So waiting time for P1 is 14 milliseconds because P1 starts executing after completion of P4, P2 and P3. So in order to calculate the average waiting time, which is equal to waiting time for all the processes divided by the number of processes. So waiting time for all the processes for all P4, P2, P3 and P1. So sum up all the 4 processes, so divided by 4, so that comes to 23. So divide by 4, so which is equal to 5.75 milliseconds. So in order to calculate turnaround time, so that is equal to time spent in ready queue plus execution time is that will give you a turnaround time. So in order to calculate turnaround time for P2, so that is time spent in ready queue for P2 is 2 milliseconds. In order to execute P2 it takes 5 milliseconds. So totally we have 7 milliseconds for P2. So turnaround time for P4 is time spent in ready queue is 0 milliseconds plus execution time is 2 milli. So that sum up to 2 milliseconds. Turnaround time for P3 is time spent in ready queue is 7 milliseconds and execution time is also 7 milliseconds. So if you sum up this, it comes to 14 milliseconds. So turnaround time for P1 is time spent in the ready queue is 14 milliseconds and execution time is 10. Therefore, sum up that we get for 24 milliseconds. In order to calculate the average turnaround time, so sum up all the turnaround time of all the processes divided by the number of processes. So that sum up to 47 divided by 4 milliseconds, which we get 11.75 milliseconds. Next type of scheduling we have is round robin scheduling. In round robin scheduling, each processes which is there in the ready queue will execute for a predefined time slot. That means each process in the queue will have a definite time slot. It runs accordingly. So round robin begins the message equal chance to all. The execution starts with picking up the first process which is there in the queue, ready queue. Then it starts executing for a predefined time, and when the time elapses or the process completes, the next process in the ready queue is selected for execution. So this repeats for all the processes which is there in the queue. Once each process is in the ready queue is executed, so then this predefined time period is also completed, then the scheduler comes back and picks up the first process in the queue again for execution. So this sequence will be repeated again and again until all the processes in the queue gets executed. So here there is a figure for round robin scheduling. In that figure we can see that there are 4 process 1, 2, 3 and 4. So assume that all the processes are there in a ready queue, so which we can be considered as a circular queue in which scheduler picks up the first process for execution, that is process 1 starts to execute. So let me assume that each process is scheduled for a 10 milliseconds time period. Now process 1 starts its execution for 10 milliseconds. Even though the process 1, whether it completes its execution or still the execution is left out, so it will be switched to process 2 after 10 milliseconds. Now in the same way, process 2 starts its execution after 10 milliseconds, whether it has been completed or still it has a time to execute, so it switches to process 3 after its execution, if it is pending or it has been completed. So in the same way it repeats for process 3 and process 4 also. So all the time slots for all the process is fixed for 10 milliseconds. So now after completion of process 4 execution, now the execution switches to process 1 again, and then comes back to the beginning of the queue to pick up the first process. So this repeats. This is called as round robin scheduling. In order to have a time slot which is provided by the timer tech feature of the time management unit of OS kernel, this time slice is kernel dependent and it varies in order of a few milliseconds, or it might be few microseconds. Round robin scheduling ensures that every process should get a fixed amount of CPU time for execution. So when the process gets its fixed time for execution, it is determined by first come first serve policy. If the process terminates before the elapse of the time slice, the process releases the CPU voluntarily and the next process in the queue is scheduled for execution by the scheduler. So let us take an example. So here in this example, 3 processes with the process IDs P1, P2 and P3 with estimated completion time 6, 4 and 2 milliseconds respectively. So P1 has 6 milliseconds, P2 as 4 and P3 as 2 milliseconds. All the 3 will enter the ready queue all together in the order of P1, P2 and P3. So now we have to calculate as usual waiting time and turnaround time for each process, and also we need to calculate average waiting time and average turnaround time, assuming that there is no IO waiting for the processes. In round robin algorithm, here we have a time slice fixed as 2 milliseconds. So here let us analyze using the diagram. According to the first step, in the order ready queue P1, P2 and P3. P1 as usual it has 6 milliseconds, P2 has 4 milliseconds, P3 has 2 milliseconds. Now the queue is ready with the execution timings. So as usual here the first come first serve, P1 will be scheduled first. The time slice given for this execution for each process is fixed as 2 milliseconds. Now P1 starts its scheduling. In the next step, after 2 milliseconds, so the scheduling P1 should be preempted and scheduling should be for P2 now. So P1 still the execution time is remaining is 4 milliseconds. So even though there is execution time is still there, but it is preempted to P2. Now P2 starts its execution. Its execution time is 4 milliseconds, but the time slice fixed is 2 milliseconds. So in the next step we can see that after 2 milliseconds P2 will be preempted, and it gives a chance for execution for P3 process. So P3 process, here you can observe it has 2 milliseconds, so it completes within the time slice. So for the next step we can observe that P3 will be completed its execution, so that only left out process is P1 and P2. Next, after P3 the turn will go to P1. So P1 has 4 milliseconds, so but the time slice is 2 milliseconds. So after 2 milliseconds it gets preempted and gives schedule to P2. Now P2 starts its execution. The remaining execution time for P2 is 2 milliseconds. So now P2 completes. Lastly remaining process is P1. So time for P1 is now 2 milliseconds. So it completes within that time slice. So this is how we can analyze the example given. So the execution sequence can be written as below. First P1 starts its order in the ready queue. So for 2 milliseconds, after that 2 milliseconds it gives schedule, gets preempted and gives scheduling to P2. P2 again 2 milliseconds, after that it comes to P3. So after 2 milliseconds again the queue moves to P1. So P1 starts for 2 milliseconds, but P2 next from P1 it goes to P2. So P2 it completes its 2 milliseconds. Now P3 has completed within the time slice, therefore again the execution will move to P1. The waiting time for all the process are given as follows. So waiting time for P1 is, the starting time for P1 is 0. So 0 milliseconds plus, if you see the previous slide you will understand more clearly. So P1 starts, the next time slot starts at 6 milliseconds. So therefore ending of P1 in the first slot is 2 milliseconds. Therefore it is 6 minus 2. If you see the previous slide you will understand more clearly how we got this 6 minus 2. And the next P1 starts at 10 milliseconds. The ending of P1 in the previous execution was 8 milliseconds. Therefore it is 10 minus 8. Therefore that is equal to 0 plus 42 plus 2, that is equal to 6 milliseconds. So P1 starts executing first and waits for 2 milliseconds time slice to get execution back, and again one time slice for getting CPU time. So you can observe the previous diagram, you'll understand more clearly. So waiting time for P2 is, so in the same way it is 2 minus 0 plus 8 minus 4, which is equal to 6 milliseconds. So waiting time for P3 is 4 minus 0, that is 4 milliseconds. So here P3 starts executing after completing the first time slice for P1 and P2 and completes its execution in a single time slice. So in order to calculate again waiting time, that is average waiting time. So waiting time for all the process divided by number of processes. So it is 6 plus 4 divided by 3, that gives you 16 by 3, 5.33 milliseconds. In the same way, calculate turnaround time. The formula we have is time spent in ready queue plus execution time. So for calculate turnaround time for P1, P2 and P3, for P1 we get 12 milliseconds, P2 10 milliseconds, P3 6 milliseconds. Take the average of that. So finally we'll get 9.33 milliseconds. In priority based scheduling, the priority based will be ensured that a process with highest priority is serviced at the earliest compared to other lowest priority processes in the ready queue. any high priority process enters this ready queue, then that will be immediately scheduled for execution. The priority of the task or any process can be indicated through various mechanisms. Like while creating the process or task, the priority can be assigned to it, or else the priority number associated with this process is the direct indication of its priority. So for example, if a priority has been assigned as 0, it indicates that it has a highest priority. So this convention need not to be the universal. That means it may not be true for all the cases, and it depends on the kernel always level implementation of the priority structure. So whenever a new process enters the ready queue, the scheduler will sort the ready queue based on the priority and picks up the process with the highest level of the priority for execution. Let us analyze priority based scheduling with an example. So here they have given as 3 processes with a process IDs P1, P2, P3 with estimated completion time 10, 5, 7 milliseconds, and priorities given for this process are 1, 3, 2, where 0 highest priority, 3 for lowest priority respectively. All the 3 will enter the ready queue together. A new process P4 with estimated completion time 6 milliseconds and priority 0 enters the ready queue after 5 milliseconds of start of execution of P1. Now you need to calculate the waiting time, turnaround time of each process, and also calculate the average time and average runaround time in the priority based scheduling algorithm. We can analyze using the diagram shown here. So here priority basis P1 with highest priority, next P3 will be given the highest priority, and third priority will be given for P2. So P1 has 10 milliseconds execution time, P2 has 5 and P3 has 7. So P1, P2 and P3 are in the queue. Now P1 as scheduling, P1 has the highest priority, so that will be scheduled. So after 5 milliseconds, P4 will enter the ready queue with the highest priority 0 for execution time 6 milliseconds. Now P1 should be preempted and P4 is scheduled. So now P4 starts its execution after 6 milliseconds completion. P4 will be completed. So next scheduling should be done for highest priority is P1. So still P1 is left out with its execution. So P4 starts its execution. So after 5 milliseconds P1 completes its execution. So next priority should be given for P3. Therefore P1 after completion P3 is scheduled. So after P3 completes, P2 is scheduled. So this is how the priority basis scheduling goes. So execution sequence can be written as below. So P1 starts its execution on the priority basis. After 5 milliseconds, the priority of P4 is highest compared to P1. Therefore P1 will be preempted and gives a schedule for P4. So P4 completes its execution. So on priority basis, next is P1. So P1 executes for 5 milliseconds. Then the priority is given for P3 and P2. So as usual, for calculating waiting time of all the process are given as waiting time for P1 is 0 plus 11 minus 5 milliseconds. You'll understand more clearly why it is 11 minus 5 in the previous slide. So waiting time for P1 is 6 milliseconds, waiting time for P4 is 0, waiting time for P3 is 16 milliseconds. So waiting time for P2 is 23. So in the same way calculate average waiting time, which comes to 11.25 milliseconds. So in the same way calculate turnaround time. So that is time spent in ready queue plus execution time. So for P1 it is 16 milli, P4 is 6 milli, P3 is 23 milliseconds, P2 is 28 milliseconds. So calculate average turnaround time, which comes to 18.25 milliseconds. These are the 2 books referred for these topics.